Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Magical Learning Podcast for this week. And you'll see we're at a very special number this week, episode 299. This is a very exciting episode, and we're joined by a very special person to be celebrating that. But before we get to them, as always, we've got to check in and see how everyone's week has been. So let's check in with a guest who hasn't been on in a while. And by guest, I mean facilitator and great guy, Alan. Alan, last time we checked, you were about to head overseas on a bit of a journey. Do you want to tell us a little bit about what's happened since then?
I have been to South Africa with my daughter Annabelle, who books weird and amazing trips. We volunteered as teachers' aides in a very poor part of South Africa, just below Cape Town. And one of the things that happened along the way was I was talking to my teacher and I said, I can possibly do a bit of a motivational speech to the children in the class here in Year 6 around Annabelle's journey through school. And I put a bit of a PowerPoint together and said, this is the outline. And she said, could you do that in front of the school assembly now, please? And I got quite a surprise and it went really well. Later that day, I met up with Annabelle at school and she said, what did you say? She says, I'm famous.
Well, excited to have someone famous on the podcast, Alan. What a great journey. We're so happy to have you back on.
Says it's fantastic to be here.
Love that. And Danette, how are you going? Director of Learning, how's things?
Yeah, big week this week. So came in from London on Tuesday night or Tuesday afternoon and been at the farm last couple of days and just arrived in Canberra and about to go down the coast for the weekend after the next two podcasts. So yeah, very excited.
Wow. Well, very
Big
exciting,
week.
Danette. Big week. Very excited to have you on. And thank you so much for joining us. And Kylie Paatch, how are you going this week?
I'm great. I'm actually very, very happy to be here. I've done a few podcast interviews this week, and I can tell you already that this is going to be my favorite because the energy is good, and it's a nice way to finish my week. So I'm great.
Well, Kylie, we are so excited to have you because we are talking about something very exciting today, which is your new book, The Connect Effect, which we're very excited to get into. But did you want to tell us a little bit about yourself for our audience who might be listening to you for the first time before we get into your exciting new book?
Great. Well, I'll get the professional spiel is that I'm a leadership coach, facilitator, and keynote speaker, and now I'm an author. So it's a field that I've been in for the last, I really sometimes, it always feels a bit scary to say this, but it's a field I've been in for 30 years, so a few decades. Both as a leader and as a coach and facilitator on the sidelines. And I am exceptionally passionate about leadership and creating environments where people can fulfill their potential and thrive. So I love what I do. I'm really, really lucky to do the work that I do.
Oh, Kylie, your passion's already coming through the screen. And I will recommend people go check out the screen because they can see your book in the background. So you can check that out on YouTube and Spotify. Very exciting. Well, Kylie, speaking of your book, The Connect Effect, do you want to tell us a little bit about this before we kind of get into today's conversation, a little bit about it and why you wrote it?
Yes, so the Connect Effect is a book for leaders or anybody that's in a position of influence. So where they are responsible for getting others on board, and it's really about how you engage, how you get loyalty, ownership, and engagement. And I wrote the book for a couple of reasons. One of the reasons that I wrote the book specifically was I've always wanted to write a book. So I read this quote once. This really, I don't know who, actually I do. There's a guy called Robin Sharma, and he wrote this book. Robin, Danette? Yeah. He wrote this book, Who Will Cry When You Die? And in it, he had this chapter that said, if it's possible in your life, do these three things: write a book, have children, and plant a tree. Well, I have children. I have planted a tree, but I hadn't written a book. So I thought that would be the next best thing. The other reason I wrote it is because I have been in this space for a long time. I really wanted to be able to put some of my thinking out there that would help leaders. The book is a very, very practical guide. So I like things to be, as a coach and facilitator, I like to make sure that people have practical strategies and things that they can do. So it's a practical guide that leaders can pick up to help them if they've got a team of people that perhaps aren't on board, or disengaged, a bit disconnected. We now have what is it? 6 generations in the workplace now, and there's lots of things changing. So I could really see that there's disengagement and disconnection is just growing and continuing to grow. Continuing to advance. So I thought that it would be a really great opportunity to put my thinking, my thoughts, stories, and this practical framework into a book.
Awesome. Well, we're excited to sort of get into some of the ideas around it. And I think there's no better place usually to start than Danette. Danette usually teases up really nicely. So, Danette, I'm going to throw to you. What were your questions, and tell us a bit about why you chose them?
I have to say first, Kylie, Robin was actually our personal coach, so know Robin very well, and we will share that little snippet with him about why you wrote this, because he would love that story. So how awesome is that?
I love that. That's the first time I've shared that as well, so I'm really glad I did.
Oh, bless. I am too. That's gorgeous. So my question, I always like to start, because a lot of our English language is quite abstract. And so even when we say connection and words like that, it's like, okay, what does it mean for you, so our audience members can really get on the same page? So my first question is, can you define what you mean by connection before we get to the second question?
Great question. And I had a couple of the other podcasts I've done, no one's actually asked me this question, and I thought that they actually would. So thank you, Danette, for asking this. So connection is the act of joining or aligning with someone or something. And when it comes to human relationships, connection is that energy and that feeling of being seen and heard and understood and valued. And it's that sense that someone knows who you are and they actually care about you. And so the connect effect, which is what I've written a book about, is what happens when leaders intentionally create the conditions for that. And in the book, I refer to this framework called the know, show, grow model, which is, the practical piece. And what it really does is it helps leaders or anybody that's in a position of influence create greater connection with the people that they're working with or responsible for. And it's a framework that I tried and tested and have used for years. And what I found was when I used it, that it got greater engagement and loyalty and ownership and trust. In fact, I use it as a facilitator. I use it as a coach. I use it with my, family members. Not that I sit there and plan out, we're going to know, show, and grow, but it's always there in the background.
So I was going to ask you more about the connect effect, but actually I'm really interested in your framework. So would you mind unpacking it just a little bit so our audience, viewers and listeners can understand a bit more, because it sounds amazing.
Oh, thank you. Thank you. So in the framework, as I said, there's 3 things. So know, show, and grow. And I talk about how important it is to know the people that you are leading or working with. And that, you need to know some of those basic things like, what's, it's some things around what's in, like their hobbies and their family members and all those general things that we do just to connect with people. But one of the things that I think is really, really important is to know the people that you're working with, particularly at a bit of a deeper level. And so I talk about in the know part of it that you need to know their why, you need to know their way, and you need to know their wants. And when I talk about their why, I talk about, what gives them purpose and meaning, what motivates them, why do they get out of bed every day? Because I think when you understand that with someone, particularly someone that you're leading or coaching or training or working with, that's really, really important, because you can't help them fulfill their potential and get the best out of them unless you do. So, and then we talk about their way. So This is really just finding out about the ways in which they prefer to work, the ways in which they like to receive information, how they like communication, how they like to be communicated to. And I think this is really important too now as we are starting to um, be a lot more conscious and inclusive, particularly in workplaces. You know, I actually have ADHD, and I wish way back when that someone had asked me what was my way and how did I like to, you know, be involved with things or perceive information and all those sorts of things. Nobody ever asked, and so it didn't really create a place for me to learn well or to feel safe, you know, in the work environment. So the way bit's really important, and then also the wants. So really, and with the wants, I always talk about what are the aspirations, like what do people really want to achieve, um, and also what are the things that they fear, like what keeps them up at night. Because I think when you know those things, you really get to understand someone. And I always talk about leadership. My definition of leadership is it's about taking someone from where they are now to where they could be, should be, or want to be. And so, in order to do that, you've got to know them. You've got to know the starting point, and you've got to. That's the first step to forming that relationship with them. And then I talk about the show part of it is really about you demonstrating that you do see them, that you understand them, that you know them, and that you value them. And I break the show part down into show them you know. So if they've shared their strengths or the things that keep them up at night or the things that are important to them, show you know that and actually work on that. Give them opportunities to um, you know, achieve the goals that they set out. Or if you know that they fear something or they're unsure of something, you can validate them, you can support them, you can put some, you know, guardrails or boundaries around that for them. So you show them that you know. And then the other one is show them that you care. So when I talk about the show that you care, I sort of break this down into a couple of things. Show them that you care enough about them, uh, that you do consider them, that you do want to help them, you do want them to grow to fulfill their potential. But sometimes that means that you have to show some kind love, which is, you know, the empathy and the care and the concern and the support and some kindness. But also that you want to show them what I call firm love. My grandfather used to call it tough love, but I want to call it firm love. And by firm love, I mean um, you know, having those tricky and difficult conversations, telling the truth, giving feedback, being constructive, sometimes challenging others to get outside of their comfort zone, to step up into things. And then the other part that I bring to the show that you care is presence. So we show people we care when we turn up and we're present and we're in the moment with them. So that sort of sits with that. And then the other bit for the show is show the way. So one of the things that I think is exceptionally important in leadership, as in parenting, training, any position you're in a position of influence, is that you model the way, that you show the way. Because one of the things that I think gets people disengaged and not on board is that we'll often tell them what they need to do, but we don't show them or model that ourselves. So I go into lots more things around that um, as well. But for the purposes of this, I'll try and keep it a bit short. And then the grow. So the grow bit is really about helping people fulfill their potential and develop. And that's probably a part of the model that a lot of leaders don't often think about. One of the things that I know in my early stages of leadership, I knew that it was important to ensure that my people were performing and that they were, you know, doing well. But I don't think I ever really stopped to think as a leader how important it was to help them, you know, get from where they are now to where they actually could be. And so I talk about a couple of things that you want to grow, and that is grow capability. So help them grow their skills and their capabilities and their competence in what they're doing. The other one is to grow initiative so that they will actually take some ownership. But they'll also boost, when you have to take ownership and initiative, they're the other two. So grow responsibility, ownership, and initiative. When you have to do those things, you end up becoming more confident. And I think it's so important for leaders to create that environment where people walk out, feel like better than what they did before they walked into your team and working with you. So that's the grow.
Great answer, Kylie. And I love that you answered that on the spot because it was not a question we shared with you before. So thank you. And I love your model. So thank you very much for sharing the framework. Thank you.
Pleasure.
Awesome. Well, thanks for that, Danette. And I might throw to Al. Al, what was your question here?
Thank you so much for all you've shared so far, Kylie. I've got 2 pages of notes already. My question is, how can we lift performance by developing capability, not applying pressure? I find a lot of people we've learnt from the past, we apply pressure, we get people to perform out of fear. But I reckon you've got some ideas on some better ways.
Thank you. I love, as a coach and facilitator, I love this question. And you're right. I think when people are not performing, the instinct and certainly the style in the past was, okay, people are not performing, so let's put the pressure on. Let's get a bit more directive. Let's get a little bit more authoritarian. It's very sort of, very old school. And so we would do that. And what happens is sometimes we do see a little shift in performance, and we might see a little bit of a shift in compliance, but it's never sustainable. Like it never actually lasts. And if anything, it gets people off board. People aren't engaged with it and they'll just turn up and do what they have to do. And as we all know on this podcast, nothing good comes from a fear-driven, a fear-driven approach. All it does is just create more anxiety to perform, and then we don't see, then we don't really see the performance going to the level that it could, or at least, as I was saying before, it absolutely drops off. So I actually think the best approach is definitely to look at not just capability, but a couple of things. So if someone's not performing, I believe there's a multitude of reasons, but I sort of draw on these 3, and I look at them and I'll go, is it competence or capability? Is it confidence or is it clarity? And so, and I'll ask the question, like I'll actually get the person that is not performing involved in that. So we work through what out of these 3 C's, what might it be? It could be the 3 of them. If it is capability, I actually think that it's a pretty simple solution. It's not one that sometimes happens overnight, but it is a pretty simple solution. And that is, if you find out that they're lacking in some skills or some things that they don't know, you find out what they are. You then go and give them some development or some training on that. You set some goals and expectations, specifically some capability or learning goals around it. You check in to see how they're going with it. You give them regular feedback. And I think the other key here is that where possible, you take what I call like a coach-like approach. So you ask the questions, you actually get the person to have a go at themselves. You don't jump in, you don't fix things. You actually, stay on the sidelines where you possibly can, and only sort of jump in and help if you absolutely need to. And there's so many benefits to that approach, because what it does is it increases confidence, because we have to think things for ourselves and we have to try things for ourselves. And I've seen this with my kids. Like well, they're 18. They are still teenagers. It's a weird age, right? I've got twin boys. They're 18, so they're considered adults, but they're really still teenagers, right? But I've been using this approach with them for ever and a day. And what I have noticed is that when you do, particularly when you become coach-like with them, they will build confidence. Even if they make mistakes and they don't get it right, they're still having to have a go at it. The other thing is you create so much more ownership. So they'll own things, they'll take initiative, they'll take responsibility, and ultimately you do see better performance from that. So I think in order to get good performance, you've got to have this balance of, yes, there's got to be some expectations and challenge, but there's got to be some support that sits around that. And that's how we improve capability rather than that old style way.
Thank you so much, Kylie. Yeah, I love that idea of we're there with them, yeah, versus coming behind with a stick, which we know doesn't work. Thanks, Kylie.
No, I love that. And I actually think that leads really nicely into Allegra's question here, our graphic designer. And she's written in, when someone tells you they feel like their workforce is disengaged, what does that say to you?
Mm, that's a good question. What it says to me is that there is something going on within leadership, the team, the organization. There's got to be something that's contributing to that disengagement. I always say, particularly when I'm working with organizations and leaders, employees or the people that work in that organization rarely disengage overnight. Like, they don't just wake up the next morning and go, okay, today I'm going to be disengaged. It's usually the symptom. It's actually not the problem itself. And I have so many, which is part of the work I do. So I'll have a lot of CEOs and people and culture leaders come to me and say, I've got a disengaged workforce, or we've got a disengaged team here, we need your help. And they will think that disengagement's the problem, but it's actually not. I actually think disengagement's the lag. It's like the lag measure of what's actually happening. So if I hear that, I go, okay, I wonder what's sitting beneath that. And as I mentioned, often it will be the result of what the leader or the organization are doing or not doing. So getting really curious on that and then finding out what is actually causing it is usually then what I suggest you go and walk away with. But yeah, the moment I hear my workforce is disengaged, I like to ask the question, what do you think might be causing that? Which is not always easy for people to answer for a couple of reasons. One is they perhaps haven't stopped to think about it being the symptom. But the other thing is that means they have to take some responsibility and look at how they've contributed, which can be quite confronting, and that in itself can be a little bit telling in terms of how well we're going to be able to sort out this disengagement problem.
Yeah, wow. I love that answer. And I think it actually kind of interestingly leads into John, who's one of our facilitators' questions here. And this is another question about connection here, but it's got some frameworks around it. So John writes, how does that connection or the ability to connect fluctuate due to your connection or the belief in the product service output? And how do we manage that? So how are we sort of integrating what the business is, I guess, into that connection element?
So what does he well, you're asking this on his behalf, but what do you think he specifically means when he's talking about the product and the service and the output?
So I'm wondering, I think my interpretation of this question was essentially, does disengagement ever stem from perhaps what the actual service is that's being offered, or perhaps the actual, thing that you're selling? For example, like I used to work, I guess, at a suits store, and the suits that we were asked to sell were the worst quality suits, because of the highest markup. So I think that that might be some level of what he's trying to get at. There was a lot of questions within the question and options in the question, but I think that's kind of roughly where he's going at. So is there a connection between actually the work that you're doing, I suppose, the actual business, and the ability to connect?
Yeah, absolutely. That's what I think. I thought he was asking, but it's the coach in me, right? I can't help it. Get clarity. I hate making assumptions. It is actually a really good question, and it does happen. So my answer to that is yes. What happens is if we don't believe in something, and we're not aligned or connected to it, it is really difficult to engage with it. Your example's a great one with the suit. Like, if you don't believe in the product and you're not connected to it in any way, it is extremely difficult to sell it. It's extremely difficult to get behind that. I remember back in my days of selling travel, like sometimes, particularly in the 90s, there would always be this push on certain airlines, and there'd be lots of commission involved. So, you'd make lots of money if you sold them. And I used to really, really struggle because I didn't believe in the product. I didn't believe, like, I sometimes didn't even believe in the safety of the airline. I was like, I would not fly that airline. Um, and so I actually never used to sell it. So I used to get in trouble a little bit in terms of why the sales figure's not here, but because I was not connected to it. And I think this is something I talk to leaders a lot about when they're rolling out changes or implementing a change in the workplace. You've got to find ways for people to connect to this, because if they're not connected to it and they're not engaged with it, they're not going to really do anything with it. This change or this new product or this new service or whatever it is that you're putting in place is absolutely going to fall short. And I think, sometimes people say, well, how do you manage that? And I think what you've got to do in those situations is you've got to involve, if you can sense that someone is not connected to the product or the service or the change or whatever it is you've got to ask the question. So I've noticed, what I've observed is this. Tell me, what's the disconnect here? What's holding you back? And find out what that is. And there will always be a way uh, to connect with something. So to ask, how might you be able to connect with this? How can we create some meaning around this as well? So, one of the things I talk a lot about in the book is, particularly if you're a leader and you've got to influence some of these things, is I mentioned before, if you know your people well, if you know what motivates them and gives them meaning, sometimes you can draw on that. So you can go back to them and say, look, I know one of the things that is really important to you is this. Might this be a way that we can get on board with this, or we can do this, or whatever that might be?
Wow. Well, I absolutely love that. I'm going to go to my question now, because what you've been talking about has actually sparked something very interesting in this whole thing. Because you're just talking about, you're talking about not really believing in what you're kind of selling, but then ultimately, you ended up becoming the national leader of people and culture at Flight Centre, right? And if you look at your career path, it started down a little at a branch, and then you went the whole way up, right? And it's so interesting to hear someone that would end up becoming the sort of national leader of people and culture was at the beginning not sort of like, because I was the same. I at that same suit store, I couldn't believe in the thing that I was supposed to be selling. But then you've ended up taking that to a place where you were able to actually sort of implement a lot of the sort of working and become this sort of national, leader. So do you want to tell us a little bit about that journey and what that's taught you? Because I found that very fascinating.
Thank you. Oh wow, that could be a whole podcast in itself. I will start off by saying that Flight Centre, who I worked with, were an incredible organisation to work with. They were very big on growing the business, but they were also very big on growing their people. And they had 10 philosophies, which, if any of them ever listen, far too many. But anyway, they had 10 philosophies, but their number one philosophy was their people. And they really did honor that. And they had systems and structures in place that really supported that. So, as a leader, every month you had to have one-on-one conversations with your people. As an area manager, you had we used to run these things called buzz nights, where there was like lots of reward and recognition, and so that was expected that you did that. So it was always about people. But I joined the company when they were on a rapid growth expansion, and it was one of those things that if you worked hard, that if you had the right attitude, and that, funnily enough, you connected with the people around you, and you cared about the people around you, that you were given opportunities. And so I started out in travel, and because I had that work ethic, I cared about people. It was the company's number one philosophy. I did get some results from operating that way. Um, I was given, opportunities that I would never ever have even thought of. Um, at the age of 31, I was the general manager for flights in a travel group in Victoria and Tasmania, which was a pretty big gig. And can I be honest? I don't think I knew how big it was going to be until I actually actually stepped into it. But we had like 800, about 8, don't quote me on the numbers. Someone, if they're, an old flight centre person will be listening to this and go, "No, it was 853 people or something." But it was a big area. There was there was 850 people. We did our own product, our own marketing. It was almost like I was the CEO of of that division, and it was absolutely massive and huge. But what I loved about the company is they would back you and they'd give you the opportunity and they'd support you. There'd be lots of development and coaching that would go with it. But I think getting thrown into the deep end all the time was how I actually really learnt. Sure, I had some technical expertise in some of the areas, but a lot of it I didn't. And I truly believe it was because uh, I prioritized relationships and I prioritized the connection piece, was how I kept evolving and sort of going up. I hate to be hierarchical, but moving up the ladder. But one of the stories I share in the book is I had gone from leading, small teams and getting to know them and um, working well with them. But then I went into a position where I had to lead that bigger function and I was leading leaders. And I'd known most of those leaders, like quite a few of them were my peers. So I sort of jumped into that role and made some assumptions that the relationships that we had were pretty solid. But of course, the dynamic changes, right? Because you were their peer and then you become their leader. And I didn't really stop to define what that was going to look like, have conversations with them about that. I just assumed they would get on board. I was out of my depth. So, that that they probably didn't think I was as competent as I could be. So there's probably not these high levels of trust. And I just assumed that there was. And it got to the point that, and I got into this role and I was like, right, well, now I'm a general manager. Like I need to focus on strategy and I need to make sure that we're performing and, we're profitable and doing all those things. And I probably got a bit ahead of myself. And I really didn't, the thing that had actually got me to that position, I kind of let go, which was the people, the relational and the people side of things, to the point that my team were absolutely not on board. And I actually found out from a colleague that the day before in a planning day, we had a planning day, they'd all gone off for lunch. And I was like, oh, where did everyone go? And I could tell they were a little bit, they're a little bit cagey with me. They're like, oh, I think they've just gone to get some lunch. And I remember at the time thinking, oh, that's weird. They didn't ask me, but oh, well, and then the next day, this colleague came up to me and said, look, I think I need to be honest with you. More than half the team went out for lunch and they were sitting there talking about you and how they're not on board with you. They don't like working with you. Um, they really don't think you're the leader that they thought you were going to be. And I was you can imagine, right? Like I was absolutely gutted because I really cared about these people and I cared about the work that we were doing. But it was a pretty profound moment because I realized then that intention doesn't always translate into, into the result that you get. And so, whilst I really cared and I was committed, I hadn't really shown that and I'd let a lot of that go. So, that was a massive, massive learning for me. In fact, it became a real turning point for me in my leadership, which is how I ended up in people and culture because I really I went and studied coaching. I wanted to learn to be more coach-like. I went and studied other parts of human behavior, like how to get people on board, how to be more relational. And it took my leadership from here to, oh, for those that can't see us, I'm like doing doing things. It took, you can imagine it was like halfway mark, and then it just kept rising, it kept elevating. And I decided that from then on in, how important it was to make sure that I was relational in my leadership, but all the leaders in the company that we worked at Flight Centre, but also now in my own work beyond that, that relational piece was really big.
Wow, what a great story. And thank you so much for sharing that. And I actually I have a very quick follow up because we've got to get some final thoughts from everybody. But
Yeah.
that moment that you were talking about there where you found out that, people weren't on board and you kind of had to take that moment in. And you're such a personable person. It feels so strange to hear this story, honestly, like, because your joy for people is really coming through. But how did that moment, because there must have been a moment, like I can imagine most people hearing that would have a lot of ego and be like, how could they do this to me? Like I can see that like as a negative towards like, now I need to exert some more control over here because but you've gone the other way and you've gone, I've lost my skill that was giving me so much strength. So is it all right if you quickly just talk a little bit about that? Because that's so interesting.
Yeah. I I was actually brought up to always take responsibility for whatever uh outcome occurred. And so I think that foundation was really helpful because I remember being really disappointed and gutted by it. And I absolutely did feel that natural instinct and need to defend and go, well, hang on a minute, I've done this and I've done that and whatever. But there was it was actually my grandfather's voice. He was he's a great role model for me. And he would always ask questions like, "So how do you think you contributed to this?" Like, and so I remember that little voice of, "How do you think you might have contributed to this?" And so I went home and I did reflect on that. And the next day I thought, wow, like, so I kind of worked through it that way. But I think that was the yeah, having that foundation of responsibility was huge. And I actually then decided to go and get a coach because I was like, I need some help here. Like, I've now identified that I've contributed to this, but I don't actually know how to get it back and know what to do. So that's actually how I sort of fell in love with coaching because I experienced it myself.
Wow. Well, that's a great sort of tie into the end of that. That's beautiful and gives us a little insight into your coaching and a bit of mentality there. But that's what a great lesson. Speaking of lessons and final thoughts, we're gonna have you back because we didn't get to all the questions today. But let's get some final thoughts from people here. Let's go to Al. Al, I might start with you. Did you have any final thoughts on today's conversation?
Mhm. Thank you so much, Kylie. Everything you've said today has resonated so much. I love the know, show, and grow model. I'll definitely be going back studying that. And you mentioned at the start something along the lines of work and family. To me, those two ties in so much with the skills that we're learning and that idea of showing that we care. I think that is something that we are all missing in our busy lives. I know myself, I get home, I don't take the time to show I care about things. That's my big takeaway from today. So thank you.
Oh, thanks, Al.
Awesome. Thanks, Al. Loved that and loved the questions today. So that's lovely. Danette, did you have any final thoughts on today's conversation?
Yeah, I also love the no show grow framework as well. Awesome. I loved your grandfather's questions that came to you when you were reflecting on, how did I contribute to this? And, it is a process. Ego always will come out first. And then you taking that responsibility and going through and also having a coach and stuff. Fabulous conversation. Definitely want to have you back and have some more conversations about your book and also just your experience as well, Kylie. So thank you so much. And can't wait to have you back.
Thank you.
Awesome. Yes. And thank you, Danette. Great questions today. And yeah, I mean, I also took down a lot of notes as well. I thought that just even that concept around when you're adding pressure, then disengagement might start. And also that concept of something is contributing to disengagement. Something is. So there's something to look for there. I thought was a really good little thing. Kylie, did you have any final thoughts on today's conversation?
Um, I do, but it's not something that I want to add from my book. I really want to acknowledge you for creating a wonderful environment for me to contribute to this podcast. As I said, I've been on a few of them. And what I noticed from the outset was I felt like I was really set up for success. And I talk to leaders about this all the time. Give people as much clarity as you can. And from the very outset, it was like, okay, here's the podcast. Here's what's going to happen. Here's the format. Here's the framework. So I actually felt I had a little bit more certain, because it's uncomfortable. You don't know what you don't know. You provided me with some certainty and some clarity. So that made it a little bit easier. You are so encouraging, and you really you create this environment where you can see that you want to learn, like you're listening to learn and understand. And so it made it really, really safe for me to turn up and be myself and just share. I probably went a bit, I get excited. Like when this happens, I get excited. I was like, oh, I've probably shared, too many stories have gone on a bit long. But I didn't feel that with you. And so I just want to say thank you, because that is connection. That is letting someone feel understood and valued and respected. And you did that throughout the whole podcast, but you also connected with me before we even started. You showed that you actually cared. So thank you.
Well, Kylie, first of all, thank you so much for your kind words. I mean, that's really sweet of you to say, and we feel that way. I definitely feel like you've hit on a lot of truisms through us. We love learning, we love connecting, and that's true. But I think the other thing that is true is that you brought a level of connection today that really made it easy. Like it was, when you're talking about sharing too many stories, we love when people share stories. I actually find there's a lot of learning to be had there. So I'm so happy that you felt that way. You made it easy, and I honestly feel like this feels like we almost paid you, because this is episode 299. So you've said very kind things about us before we head into episode 300. So I very much appreciate that. No, but Kylie, you've brought so much to today. And I feel like, we learn from every episode, but this has been such an excellent one. And your energy really shines through, I'll say.
Thank you.
That's all right. Well, Kylie, I was going to say, but people, speaking of your energy shining through, if people want to connect with you, not that aren't on the Magical Learning podcast, where's the best place to do that? And where's the best place for them to pick up your book?
Yes. So they can connect with me via my website, which is kyliepaatch.com.au. I'm sure you'll put that in the show notes because most people can't spell my surname. On LinkedIn. So because I do work with a lot of leaders in corporate, you can find me on LinkedIn and also Instagram, Kylie Paatch Leadership. And in terms of the book, all the major book retailers online, so Amazon, Booktopia, I've learnt something new. Like they all have different prices, and when you first bring out your book, like the prices fluctuate. So I'm going in like daily and checking, and Amazon is where you get the best bargain at the moment. So that's the best spot to find it.
Great. Well, we'll have that link available so that people can get the best bargain. But I think it's a very valuable book no matter what you pay for it, I'd say, Kylie. So I'm very happy to have had you on this and been part of your podcast. So like I said, we'll definitely have to have you back for another chat, even if it's not about a book. We'll happily have you on, I think.
Oh, I'd love to. I was like, oh, can I get on the panel as well?
Look, it's exciting. You'll get an episode before 300. You'll have to be on our in the next 100 as well. So very happy to have you back, Kylie. Team Danette, thank you. And Alan, thank you so much for great questions. And thank you for a great chat.
Cheers.
Kylie, thank you for being on episode 299. And as always, everybody, have a magical week.